Hey guys, welcome to Solo ReacTalk. Tonight I'm going to be reacting to Star Wars vs. Warhammer 40K, episode 22, A Storm Breaks by AFanWithTooMuchTime. If you want to check out my previous reactions to the other episodes, remember the playlist card is going to be at the top here. If you want to check out the original video as well as AFanWithTooMuchTime's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. Yes, the last episode 21, Struggle. We've had, multiple stories on the surface of the planet Axiom, and we've also had stories happening on the spaceships in space. And yeah, a lot of battlefields, a lot of struggle. There's one particular Inquisitor that I do not like who was, talking about struggle. And yeah, the Star Wars side are struggling, to get a hold on this situation on Axiom. And in space, they don't fare any better. Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka, they're having their own problems. Either it's to direct a ship in a proper controlled crash landing onto Axiom, or fighting against Sarafan the Librarian, or Anakin Skywalker, escaping from a detention cell. And then on the surface, you have Commander Bile, you have the clone troopers who are holding the Majors, what was the name again? Majors Dominus, and there's a lot of situations that are occurring both on the surface and in space. And like I've said before last week, I don't know who's going to be the clear victor in any of these battles just yet. It's still murky, it's still cloudy. We don't know who's going to come out on top, but yeah, we are now continuing on with episode 22, A Storm Breaks. Let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
Lazarus stood, watching as the already dim light around him dimmed further and further. The main body of the storm had rolled in, heavy and wet, soaking all beneath in a continuous blanket of falling rain.
Is this a depiction of Major Lazarus? Okay. I didn't know that half of his face was, having mechanical parts like this. So yeah, interesting. All right.
The haze it created lent the whole battlefield a ghostly, surreal quality. The three-legged tanks were burning, their fires defiant beneath the shrouds of suffocating rain, lending distant lights to the murk. The toy soldiers were running, regrouping with their larger force, like dread spirits fleeing the sight of the Emperor. They were massing, turning around from their initial assault on the bridge diversionary forces and wheeling about to face him and the other Calambians. It was just as planned, the best case scenario. Except for one vital, oh so vital detail. The Imperium had lost the air battle above them, and while the engagements were persisting as the remaining air forces pulled out, soon there wouldn't be a single friendly eagle in the sky. At best, it meant that they would not be extracted. At worst, the enemy would soon bring more than rain down upon them. Major, what now? Asked the soldier beside him. He took in a long breath, listening to the static in his earpiece, waiting. He watched the mass of angry, scowling Republic ghost soldiers drawing nearer and nearer. A mass of white and black, a rustling under the rumbling and rattling of the storm. He waited, tasting the rain on his lips, truly shocked at how clean it tasted. Like purified water, no aftertaste at all, in spite of the fact that this was a hive world.
Yeah, they built the hive worlds differently in the Star Wars galaxy.
Blinked the rain out of his eyes and figured he could think of worse places to lie down and be still forever. Sir? He asked. Yes, right, the Major said, shaking his head. He tapped his earpiece, setting the frequency to all nearby channels. Eagles just lost the air. We aren't getting out by extraction, he said plainly. The words felt weird in his mouth, unreal. He knew what they must be thinking, knew what those who still had their senses would feel when they heard those words. So we all die now, or at least most of us. He knew they would be thinking that, and was proud in the scene that followed. Calambians stood or crouched, silent, still, living dead men held in the thrall of action of battle. They were resolute, ready. They were true warriors, and Lazarus would not let them die, not without a struggle, not without a fight.
To the bitter end, into the jaws of death.
As far as I'm concerned, Lazarus said to the Calambians, it's up to us to extract now. Tech priests, start creating cover and making hardpoints. Munition techs, get out there and rig these heretics a proper welcome. Everyone else, get to the ledge and start rappelling down. We need to go back the way we came, he said. He knew what he had just ordered was little better than attempting a holdout, maybe even worse. But from what Lazarus could see, this was their one and only chance. They would need to rappel down the side of the park structure, all the way down to where they had started. Their ascension cables were not long enough to take them all the way there in one go, as they had not been long enough to reach the lip of the park ledge when fired from below. He and his men would need to stop and reset their lines 4 times. Some would make it all the way down before any shots were exchanged. Most would not.
This is bad. This is really, really bad. You know what? If I was the clone commander, I would tell my forces to wait. Just wait for air support, since the skies now belong to the clone troops. Wait for air support. Let them pick off the Imperium of Man forces, one by one. Let them have a strafing run, bomb up the entire landscape where the Imperium of Man forces are entrenching themselves, or when they're trying to scale the walls. Let them try and do that, and then the Air Force can just pick off the different soldiers that that are trying to escape, and slowly advance. Take your time, shoot at them carefully. Make accurate shots so that you kill them on the spot. You don't give them a chance to breathe. You're squeezing them from the air, and you're squeezing them on the ground. Something like that. Yeah. But yeah, for the Imperium of Man, you guys just have to run. I don't know. I don't know what you guys can do. You guys, you need a miracle. If the Emperor is listening or watching this happening right now in his galaxy, he needs to put his own divine intervention into this. I don't know how is he going to do that. But yeah, good luck.
Most would be caught in battle with the Republic's toy soldiers, and he knew it. And they knew it too. On the double, now! He added into his Vox a second later, and the Imperial soldiers began to move out en masse. Some were already at the lip, mostly the snipers and heavy fire support. They began strapping on their ascension gear right away, and were going down the side of the park in short order. Lazarus expected them to leave their gear behind, but most of the throne-damned gunheads were too stubborn to do that much, and insisted on taking time to pack it all in and take it along. Lazarus was pulled.
If you're gonna die fighting. Have all your weapons on you. I'm totally with them.
From cursing their choices by the necessity to be more concerned with his own. Inaccurate blue shots began to fall into the backs of the retreating Calambians, chasing them in messy, encompassing swarms of blue light. The Major wheeled about to put some shots downwind of the enemy just in time for their war cry to become audible through the rain and thunder. The sight and sound which greeted him chilled his blood and had him turning back around and doubling his pace. The clones were roaring, a persistent, horrible wail of rage, of thousands of identical voices crying out for bloodshed. The force of charging clones was like an armed avalanche, outnumbering his men by so much that soon even their distant shots began to thicken the air such that accuracy no longer mattered. Damn it! Cover fire! Someone help me with cover fire! Lazarus yelled into his Vox as he slid down behind some wreckage, the smoldering remains of a downed ship, and began spraying shots of his las rifle into the charging mass. He was gratified when he saw more and more men joining in, and that gratification became relief as he saw the clones starting to slow, seeking cover of their own and breaking away from their headlong charge of running fire. Stopping their headlong assault bought more time for more men to make it to the lip. But the situation was becoming everything he feared quickly. The lip was so exposed and bare that anyone setting up to descend was left vulnerable while doing so. Already, he and most of his men were within running distance of the ledge, but going for it was like singling yourself out for death, and few were attempting it, most trying to break up and clear some of the enemy first.
You see? It's difficult for them to head for that ledge. So, the clone troopers, take your time. Don't rush this. Organize yourselves into lines and, focus your fire and picking off at the clone troops while also requesting for air support. And then once they start getting off that ledge, let the air support, go through them with their weapons and their bombs. Take your time.
But the situation was growing more dire, not less, as the clones swarmed in greater numbers and assembled into effective firing positions, vastly outnumbering his own forces. Some were making it out, but they needed some kind of distraction or proper fire break, otherwise this battle would only slide further into disaster. Get some grenadiers ready! Fire everything you've got on my mark! Lazarus yelled to the sergeant nearby. Burning throne, fine! But grenadiers aren't gonna cut it, Major! The sergeant yelled back, face smeared with the park's mud. What would you suggest I deploy? Basilisk support? Lazarus called back sarcastically, popping up from his cover to unload a rain of red lances. His last gun steamed, and he ducked back down just before a volley of blue bolts pinged and sizzled against the hull he chose to hide behind. I'd settle for a dreadnought, the sergeant said back, turning away for a moment to listen to his Vox. The grenadiers are ready, he yelled. Lazarus panted, looking over the lip of his cover and feeling like he was about to be overwhelmed, trampled and buried in a flood of white boots and cloned flesh. The onrushing army was coming dreadfully close now, a sloppy stampede of rage. But one unleashed where numbers precluded the need for tactics.
I don't like that they're actually rushing towards them, the clone troops. There's no need to rush like that. Don't do that. Don't make a stampede. Just organize yourselves properly and take your time to shoot at them one by one. You know?
He fired into their nearing faces and then ducked again, slamming his back against the cover and looking towards the ledge of the park. He had turned at the perfect moment, watching from start to finish as the wrath of the Emperor himself hauled itself on screeching limbs over the lip and into the mud, rising with a scream that was both human and machine. "Toss now?" the sergeant asked, still facing the battle.
What's going on? What's screaming and screeching and in the mud and... Okay?
"Hold on! Almost time! And by the way, Sergeant!" "Yeah?" the man said back. "I don't got any dreadnoughts, but I have the next best thing for you."
A Penitent Engine. Oh God. Oh. You can imagine her screaming and wailing and... Oh gosh. Okay, let's continue.
Lazarus said with a smile. Before the sergeant could ask anything more, his question was answered by the nearing and then passing shriek of the Sister Repentia, body held rigid, crucified onto the manifestation of her penance. The Colombian watched with wide, horror-rimmed eyes as the tortured woman and the war machine which carried her tore their way past the Imperial lines. Creaking, squealing limbs of cruel steel caked in old, bloody rust, clawed and kicked at the dirt. The blind, screaming passenger at the center of the horrid device was wailing non-stop, desperate for bloodshed. The clones noticed it before it reached them, pouring blaster fire in its direction.
Please, target the head. Target the head. I don't care about the legs, about the torso, the arms. No, the head. Target the head. Blow off that head. And this machine will go down. Okay? Oh.
But the frantic, agile movements of the wretchedly swift machine kept the passenger from taking any lethal damage as it swept blaster bolts out of the air with its right arm. The hand there was a twisted amalgamation of a power and chain fist, whirring loudly with bladed, blood-soaked claws. The white lines of the haphazard replicate ranks began to bend even before she made contact, and outright broke when the engine collided with their defenses. Her left arm belched a near-continuous stream of hellish promethium-fed fires from two dripping nozzles, clearing swaths of clones as they were doused in the hungry, weaponized fires. The fighting stalled as the clones recovered and began to reorient, the majority of their forces now focusing on the rabid penitent. But Lazarus did not let up just yet. "All right, launch grenades!" Lazarus barked at the man beside him. The sergeant nodded once and aped the command into his vox set, and the throaty thwomps of several grenade launchers sounded in near simultaneous succession. The explosives fell into the white-clad forces of the Republic, just as they began to attempt to surround and outflank the death-dealing pseudo-dreadnought that the sisters had lent to Lazarus before the battle had been joined. Hidden by the rain, the clones were mostly caught off balance again as they were blasted by all manner of varied grenades. The Major spun to order a reload and second salvo, but turned to find another sister, the Penitent's armored overseer, staring down at him. "Leave her," she said, neither crouching nor even leaning to hide behind cover. A few spatters of blue bolts darted for her, clinking and clattering off her shoulder plates, greaves, and head, each shot finding no purchase on the stalwart sister's black-powered armor. Each landed shot left no more than hissing trails of steam where the plate was heated under the rain. The red, glowing eyes of her almost owl-like helmet reminded him none too fondly of the Sister Superior, and briefly wondered at her own status.
Julia, I miss her too. I miss her.
Can't. That sister out there is tough, no doubt, but she will need to be extracted from that mess. She won't stand a chance at survival otherwise.
It's not about that. It's not about that. That Penitent Engine is designed to attack the enemy until it can no longer function, until, the human compartment of this machine has been destroyed. So don't worry. This is what they, put this lady in there for her to die on the battlefield.
Said to the armored battle priestess. Exactly, she said, her tone deadpan, flat even by the standards of a voxed voice. She is repenting her sins, and the only repentance for her is death. This is understood by me, by my sisters, and by she herself. The sister added. You want me to throw her away for a diversion? Lazarus asked, far from above the tactic. No, I want you to let her fulfill her penance, by one means or another, the sister said back. Lazarus shrugged in response. Fine, but you better get down the side first, he said, tapping the sergeant's shoulder and muttering, Signal the withdrawal on the double. The sister tilted her helm ever so slightly. And why is that? She would ask. Because that penitent just died on your recommendation. So you better live to give witness to it, or Julia's going to maul me into ground grox meat. Now get moving.
He doesn't know. He doesn't know that she's no longer with us. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is the miracle then. I remember when I said that they needed a miracle for them to survive something like this. Saying that, the emperor has to put in his hand and trying to save their lives. This is the hand right here. The Penitent Engine will cause that diversion where the clone troops will have to focus on it while the troops, the Imperium of Man troops, can escape. But they still have air support, right? Yeah, so maybe that can also come into play. But so far, they are lucky. They are lucky.
I'm only a major under the authority of the Sister Superior, so if that means anything to you, then take what I just said as an order, he said. The sister said nothing for a moment, rain pouring onto the dark, red-eyed shape, hands clutching her bolter. Now, sister! He snapped, and she hesitated only a moment longer before nodding once. She raised her bolter, fired on full automatic, and emptied her mag. The weapon spat thunder and fire, sending ripples through the wet mud as the sister absorbed the recoil without apparent effort. She loaded another magazine, locking it into place with a slap of her armored palm, and spun around, making for the lip. Lazarus smiled at that and winced, the drugs wearing off again and allowing him to feel the cavalcade of burns and wounds which coated him like a youth soldier's merit badges. He spat bile and spun up, firing into the enemy before imitating the sister and running for the ledge of the park.
I like the fact that the sister did not argue about the order, if it was like a commissar or it was an Astartes, soldier, they would be like, who are you to command me what to do? To tell me what to do. Who are you? They would actually probably kill the guy. But This sister, she is reasonable. She understands what has to be done, and she's doing it without any kind of argumentative fights with Major Lazarus. Yeah, so it's good.
"65 knew he should be taking control, knew he should be trying to rein in his frenzied, maddened forces. He knew, as did every man in his army, that they had failed, that the enemy had, unthinkably, offered up the vast majority of their forces as a bloody sacrifice, all to distract and draw 65 away from the true head of their misbegotten spear. And the knowledge of that failure quickly became a haze, an emotion, a unity of hatred, all of which called out for one thing: revenge.
Revenge is not the Jedi way. Which I'm also assuming it extends to the clone troops. It's not your way. Please don't go for revenge. Calm down. Calm down. Man, you guys are rushing. The clone troops are really rushing. I don't know why are you guys rushing like this. Calm down. You have them. Yes, the Penitent Engine is a surprise for all of us, but it's not too much of a major, situation that's going to disrupt you guys from possibly winning this fight, Just calm down. And let go of this revenge thought process. It's going to cloud your judgment and you're going to make mistakes. Yeah.
Even though 65 knew he should be drawing control back into focus, he
exactly
found he could not. For he himself was trapped within this latest frenzy every bit as much as the lowliest of troopers who were joined in this charge. They had engaged the trenches at range, and he had only sent assault squads forward to clear them after he had perceived most of their enemy to have been felled by their onslaught. But no sooner had those first few advanced squads made contact with the survivors in the trench than they were being called back, the erupting forms of the sniper tanks drawing the attention of the larger force. The charge had begun as a desperate, hopeless attempt to reinforce and save the defending forces at the artillery line, but quickly became something far less constructive and far more vindictive. And, having been at the back of the line at the start of the battle, 65, charging and blasting with his DC-15A, was now near the lead. His fervor was only fueled by the knowledge that they would soon have full air support, imagining the hell he would order onto the Imperial fanatics with great relish. But before that, he was determined to kill several with his own rifle, and he was not the only one who thought so. The men fired as they found clear shots, even before they entered effective range. It barely mattered. The power of the DC-15, combined with the number of them, made accuracy a negligible factor as the clones began to open fire, laying into the running imps, who seemed to be retreating back towards the ledge that they had cleared to perform their ambush. He smacked the side of his helmet and activated his comms. "Get me air command," he ordered. "Patching you through, sir. Please hold," came the response from the other end. This was the third time he had gotten that answer, and 65 did not know if they were being slow or if he was being impatient, nor did he care.
Third time? I'm a bit worried. Where is this air support?
He was about to begin insisting when he was forced down, a spray of laser strobes blackening his armor and a part of his helmet, and driving him into cover. He slid in the mud, his newly charred armor smoking under the cold rain as he came to rest behind the burnt-out body of the foremost sniper tank, soon joined by many more of his men. "Set up mortars!" he ordered into his comm, peeking out from behind cover and laying down fire as he did. His helmet package began filtering out the rain, highlighting silhouettes in his field of vision for him to target. 65 began dropping them wherever he could find them, feeling vicious vindication as he killed one and then 3 more. He honed in on the 4th silhouette, sighting it down and then feeling the cold bite of the rain sink into his very blood. The silhouette he was tracking grew larger and larger and larger.
It's the Penitent Engine.
Its details coming more and more into focus as it cleared the distance between them, moving at a frightening pace. Fire was streaming from its left arm, and its right seemed to be sparking and crackling with lightning, burning away the rain that fell onto it in sheets of steam. But more horrifying than any of that was the sound it was making, a sound that grew louder as it scrambled and clawed its way closer to the faltering clone lines. It was screaming, a horrible, nightmarish wail that managed to ring out like the dirge of a terrible droid and the frantic death screams of a person being opened up without anesthetic. Hostile walker incoming! Brace for contact! Prepare to surround it! 65 ordered, firing down field into the thing. The commander tensed, feeling his eyes strain, widening in his skull when the walker swatted his shot out of the air with its sparking, bladed fist. It was bounding straight for him and his cover, the mud around them quaking at its rapid approach. He kept firing at it nonetheless, his breathing growing ragged as the thing came ever more into focus. By the many moons! Commander, what the cock is that thing? One of the men near him yelled, shock and disgust ringing in his voice like a clearly struck chord.
It's a monstrosity.
It's a fragged fanatic, and it needs to die! 65 yelled back. The thing was like a droid he'd only find in his worst possible nightmare. It was rigid and rusty, with a thick, roughly rectangular body supported by 2 large bird-like legs. Its arms were relatively thin, the bare bones of a war machine overlaid with cables, wires, pipes, larger tubes, and a fine coating of rust.
This is a good depiction, Kubik. Yeah, definitely. There's the Penitent Engine with the flamethrower, the rain, the clone troopers looking at it. Ugh.
At the end of the right arm was a fist composed of whirring, interlocking saw blades, sparking and crackling with horrid alien technology. Mounted to its left arm was nothing resembling a hand or fist, but rather 2 dripping, fiery nozzles, affixed to a pair of bulbous metal tanks. But by far the most horrible aspect of the bounding, agile warwalker was not its weapons or depraved form, but rather its single soul occupant. Crucified in the center of its body, held spread by the puncturing tendrils of hundreds of extending cables, was the brutalized form of a nude woman. The only garment she wore was a blindfold, the 2-headed eagle of the insane Imperium printed onto its face. The Imperial was covered in scrapes, cuts, bruises, and blood, most of which seemed to be her own. She screamed from a red-tinged mouth as if she had flayed her own lips by the force of her voice alone. And aside from the protection the arms provided her, she seemed to have no defense whatsoever. At first, 65 had taken this to mean that she was a hostage, perhaps a citizen of Axum being used as a grimly applied human shield. He was disabused of that notion when she came upon him, sweeping one of her suspended arms, muscles bunching and flexing to perform the act, which nearly left 65 gawking as the machine aped her less than a second later. She was not a meat shield, she was the damned pilot of the insane thing! He barely had time to think those thoughts before he was forced to hit the dirt, her passing fist of blades taking most of the cover he had been using away, as well as rending every trooper who had been sheltering behind it besides himself. Burnt gore and burning shards of metal splattered down over his blackened armor, but by the time he rose, the death machine had moved on, rending open the unfortunate troopers behind him and pouring gouts of burning fuel onto those who found themselves on her left. But it would not last long, he could see, as his men began to enclose the walker, firing all the while.
If any of you have some sort of like an EMP grenade or just regular grenades, all of you simultaneously throw them at her. At the Penitent Engine. Hopefully some of them, they will blow up the body of the pilot, blow up the pilot. Hopefully. And if that doesn't work, please shoot the head. Shoot the head. I think this is something that we must all, understand in Star Wars versus Warhammer 40K. That, in order to kill an Imperium soldier or Special Forces soldier, you have to decapitate the head. You have to blow up the head. It's the only way. Because I remember what happened with Rejulia. I remember what happened with, the Space Marine who was facing up against Anakin Skywalker. The only way to kill these people properly is to make sure that the head is gone. Or else, the Penitent Engine is just going to continue moving around because, the head is still there. So please, guys, you have to... Yeah.
The thing was sturdy, its bare frame eating volleys of blast that would have sundered smaller vehicles. It would not matter, or at least it wouldn't have, if not for the follow-up attack. As the clones closed in around the rampaging walker, Commander 65 heard the barely audible, distant thwomps of grenade launchers, and watched as explosives of all manner rained down into the men massing behind and around the dreadful wailing machine. Bodies were tossed, chopped, and burned to pieces as the rain of death fell into them, spreading chaos among the clone ranks. 65 rose, a string of red innards hanging from his helmet. He tossed down his DC-15 and drew his powerful sidearm, a heavy blaster pistol. With that, he began to approach, coming in at an angle and watching the machine as it tore its way up his men. The thing moved like an ape-like abomination, smashing and rending clones wherever it could catch them. The pilot of the inhuman contraption suffered many blaster shots, losing a hand and a foot, but seemed to take some pains to defend herself, though she did not seem slowed or impaired by her injuries. 65 watched how the gears in its arms swung, how they cranked and turned as she swept her death-dealing limbs this way and that. He reached down with his free hand and took out his EMP grenade, and came closer still. It was now that ARC Trooper Kindles leapt out from the crowd of fleeing troopers being driven before the flailing walker. He raised the repeating blaster cannon he had no doubt taken from another clone, letting loose with a line of tight blue shots as he bellowed a challenge to the walker. The machine monster tried to guard its flesh core, as it had before, but Kindles was too accurate, too prepared with his stance and mounting. The engine of destruction came for him, heeding his challenge as he unloaded his shots, both screaming at the other, but even the warding, sparking fist of the metal monstrosity failed to protect it from the ARC Trooper's attack. The woman bound to the center of the machine was ripped into ragged halves by the line of blaster fire, her spine severed and legs falling forward almost out of the machine. The woman screeched and then went silent, her lower half held dangling gruesomely by a few adhering tendrils that laced her spine.
Error.
The machine pitched, losing control of its pacing and momentum and falling forward onto the slurry of mud below it, further crushing the imp pilot beneath it. The whole mangled mess came to rest at Kindles' feet, the clone's chest rising and falling rapidly as the machine slid to a stop before him. Slowly, he turned around to the other troopers, tossing off his repeating blaster. 65 had just drawn close enough to hear his next words. See that? That's how you bring an Imperial clanker down! His voice was cut off, as was his right limb when the wreckage beneath him stirred and struck. Bladed arm reaching to destroy the boasting clone. The subtle movement had given it away, and Kindles had begun to leap aside when the claws reached for him, cleaving off his right arm and tossing the ARC Trooper several meters into the crowd. The woman, or at least the half of her that was not blasted into ribbons and crushed under her machine, began to scream again. The hands and arms of the wallwalker gouged furrows into the mud as it tried to drag itself closer to the surrounding clones, flames erupting from the nozzles on its left arm. It was this arm that 65 targeted, pitching his grenade at it and aiming for the bundle of gears and servos that connected the weapon's limb to the main body of the walker. The sphere clinked as it struck the walker, the grenade bouncing and then catching in one of the gapped teeth of a turning cog within the joint. Just as it was going to be crushed by the thrashing movement of the limb, it burst, releasing its aura of electrical disturbance into the surrounding area and, most notably, into the machine it had struck. Stepping lightly, having never stopped, he ran up the paralyzed arm, blaster pistol held tightly. The half-drowned, half-crushed, half-intact pilot did not seem capable of noticing him, or any single trooper that was not part of the mass before her, and thus provided no direct resistance as the clone stepped onto her still limb, climbing it like a messy maintenance ladder with only one arm, moving swiftly and without any pause. He soon found himself balancing atop the pitching, shaking body of the thing, balancing precariously as he dashed over to the center of its frame. He reached down with his free hand and grasped tight a handhold he found in the pitted, scorched metal. With his grip secure, he dropped down, hanging from his arm and landing beside the bound, thrashing form of the Imperial pilot. She howled and clawed at him with her hand and stump, leaving trails and lines of mud and blood across his white and black armor. 65 wasted no time, jamming the barrel of his blaster rifle into her open, wailing mouth, knocking out 2 of her teeth in the process and pulling the trigger. The blindfolded woman's eyes seemed to glow behind the wrap as ionized Tabana gas burned a hole through flesh and bone, hollowing out her skull in a single instant. The machine and the pilot it held slumped down, movements relaxing as the now titanic corpse sank into the mud. But 65 was not done. He blasted her again and again until little remained of her head outside of a blackened, jagged stump. And then he jammed the gun into the open hole of her throat and fired again and again.
You have to make sure. What I've realized is that Warhammer 40K, human beings, they are so resilient compared to Star Wars Galaxy humans. You can stab their hearts, you can cut open their stomachs, you can, cut off their arms, their legs, as long as the mind is still active. Even if the heart has stopped, as long as the mind is still active for that split second or a few more seconds or minutes, they will still do something. So, if you have that opportunity to kill them, make sure it's a devastating, destructive kill, destroy the body completely. Yeah.
Spent nearly 20 seconds in this act before tearing himself free and climbing the wreckage, panting hard, blood and ash washing away in the rain. They are monsters! He bellowed into the sky. The commander raised his pistol-bearing fist, slick with red and black gore, and aimed it in the direction of the retreating Imperials. So make sure you kill them all! The clone commander roared, his army echoing his voice and beginning the charge once more with even more fervor than before. As he watched the men under his command join his battle cry and swarm around the wrecked walker, he received the communication he'd been waiting for.
Oh, the air support? Huh.
Lazarus was at the lip, his gear set, but he had not gone over yet. The Major and a few others were still laying down covering fire for the men strapping on their ascension gear. The tech priests had welded strips of steel to use for cover along the lip, and while these barriers could only absorb a couple of blaster shots before being penetrated, they were certainly better than nothing at all. But now the Replicae were back at it, and if anything, dealing with the Penitent Engine had only made the Republic toy soldiers angrier by far. He watched as a cascading rain of blue bolts and falling mortar fire started at the tail end of the retreating Calambian line and began to run up its length like a ruthless avalanche of thundering death. The coordinated wave of overlapping munitions was fed by a quintet of nearby surviving Caterpillar walkers, their main cannons becoming a part of the incoming tide of obliteration, which the Major watched blow the last of his retreating men into bloody pieces. He barely had time to register the loss, the volley not ceasing its thundering as it ran down those not already at the lip. Instead, the cracking, roaring front of death picked up speed as it made its way straight for the edge. "Holy fucking throne! Everybody jump!" Lazarus called out, panic riddling his voice as he tossed his lasgun aside and spun around to face the open air behind him. His guts hit the bottoms of his feet, and he felt parts of him deep inside snap and break as he ran headlong into the gap. He opened his mouth to scream, and was unsure if he was succeeding, being far from the only one as all the remaining Calambians ran at full speed for the ledge. Lazarus's body got halfway past the lip before the pressure wave from the pursuing explosions propelled it far past where his leap would have carried him, sending him sailing into the yawning cavity of the city below. For all that, the Major was, in truth, still intact, a fact he could not appreciate in the moment, screaming his lungs raw as he swung down on his cable, silencing a second later as he passed from the waking world. He returned to it abruptly as his limp body collided with the wall, knocking all the breath from his lungs and leaving the Major scrambling and gasping in a most undignified manner for several prolonged seconds. He was fortunate no commissar was present to witness it. He was also fortunate to have neither struck the side of the platform with too much force, nor from any angle that would have broken his neck. Several Calambians had not been so lucky. Some had jumped in their panic without any cables at all, and others had managed to escape much as Lazarus had, only to meet with grievous injury or death upon striking the wall. The beleaguered Major groaned, hanging from the line, dazed and swinging for several moments before he finally blinked out of his stupor and got his legs positioned to the side of the building. He felt like dying, every burn, every bruise and broken bone screaming at him after the stunt he had just pulled, their chorus of pain joined gleefully by a host of new injuries. But, at least, he had found himself nearer to the bottom than the Calambians who were choosing to descend naturally. With a grunt and a kick of his legs, he began to descend towards the end of his cable. As he did, he indulged in the fact that they were not being shot at, and dared hope that the Republic clones would assume them all dead.
Yeah, that's yeah, no, you need that hope. You need it. Because Commander 65, he is on a mission of revenge. Like, he wants to make sure that you guys are all dead. But, you know, you can hope. Major Lazarus, hope.
Looking around, he could see the thousands of Imperial soldiers making their way down, struggling to keep their footing in the watery downpour. Most of the men were completely exposed as they focused on their descents, and Lazarus realized without much effort what a slaughter their withdrawal would become if the clones of the Republic realized that they were still alive. The Major felt a little hope enter him as he reached the end of his cable segment, deploying a smaller anchor to the spot before releasing the mag hook which had tethered his longer line to the building they were scaling. He leaned left as the magnetic end fell down, hearing it thunk against the metal below him, followed shortly by a string of creative Calambian curses. As he finished reeling in the hook, he noticed that there were odd metal wedges sticking out from the building, jutting from the wall around and below him. They were just large enough for a big man to crouch behind, and some even had what looked like heavy weapons mounted onto their vertical surfaces, barrels facing up. Lazarus sighed in a soft bit of relief as he recognized the handiwork of the tech priests, who had clearly gone about creating some cover and even little hardpoints to use in their descent should the worst come to pass. Lazarus had just managed to reattach the magnetic hook to the wall in front of him when that passing began.
Good job, tech priests, good job.
Winced, head jerking about as a scream was issued from above, muffled by the pounding rain, yet soon joined by a chorus of others. His eyes darted, blinking ice water clear as he scanned the spreading chaos above and around him, catching telling details as he did. A soldier was hanging limp on his own cable, while another was convulsing just below the first, also hanging, smoke rising from several burning holes in his body. Then, a third man cried out and died in a series of spasms, hanging directly above Lazarus. Looking up, he narrowly avoided the dead man's falling corpse, his cable frayed and severed, its ends red-hot and smoking. Looking up through the now cleared space, the Major began to understand what was happening. With a grunt of ignored pain and intense panic, he fingered the control mechanism for his ascension cable and began to go down. "The Replicae have spotted us! Descend, soldiers! On the double!" he barked into his vox bead. The Republic soldiers far above them were lying down, using the lip of the platform for cover as they peeked out with their long rifles and fired downward into the escaping Imperials. This, at least, seemed to limit the number who could engage them, but they were difficult to fire back on or suppress. Still, the guardsmen tried, both the Major and his Calambians. Most of the Imperials drew their weapons, descending on their automatically unwinding cables while firing back up at the clones. Lazarus saw one Replicae corpse drop, and then another, and another.
This is a weird, battlescape here, the Calambrian troops, as well as Major Lazarus, they're scaling the structure going downward, right? And then you have the clone troops who are also, at the top, who are also, going to be scaling it downward. So they're like fighting horizontally, if I can say that. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
Brief and tumbling blurs of white, ghosts of the Republic's heretics, their souls dragged silently to hell. The sight was more than a little gratifying for the ailing Major, until one corpse collided headlong with a soldier under his command, a vengeful wraith refusing to die alone. Lazarus grit his teeth and swung himself over to one of the armed hardpoints the tech priest had set up, grabbing onto the wedge of metal when it came within reach and adhering himself to the spot with his short anchor. Firmly affixed, he sat back and looked at the weapon which was now mounted before him, resisting the urge to whistle as the long, blessed form of an autocannon revealed itself through the haze of oncoming rain. He checked the chamber and firing mechanism with a couple of cursory glances, finding the weapon oiled, loaded, and mounted with a particularly long spool of armor-piercing ammunition. The Major was grateful, as he would be unable to reload it in the position he was hanging in. He was less pleased with the makeshift mounting, which did not allow him to move his aim very much, but at his distance, adjusting by a few centimeters would be all he needed. Lazarus squinted his eyes in the rain, taking one more moment to identify the shapes of his men and the origin of his foes, before he oriented the gun and squeezed down on the thick trigger in his hand. The barrels of the weapon spun with a whine, before abruptly spilling forth a thundering shower of molten lead, like defiant anti-rain, falling up instead of down, burning and killing in place of cooling and nourishing. He fired through the lip of the platform, penetrating the thick civilian metalwork and shredding the clones who hid behind it for cover. His example was soon followed all across the broad side of the vast descent, as men took up similar positions and manned heavy weapons to cover their retreating brothers and sisters. All the while, the majority of the Imperial force continued its frenzied attempts at retreat, and the Major dared believe that many, if not most, might escape. It seemed the tech priests had saved the day, their emplacements proving a decisive advantage on this oddest of battlefields.
Well done. Well done.
Or, at least, so it had seemed. Then Lazarus saw the first brilliant lance of emerald light, piercing the veil of rain above him and tearing into the side of the building. The humming beams continued cutting men in half and severing ascension cables as they strafed across steel, sending loyal Calambians tumbling and screaming to their fates.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. I mean, just look at that image. Oh, that poor man. Or was it a woman? I don't know. Ugh. Just decapitated like that. Ugh. Yeah.
This was joined by bone-shaking blasts produced from the steaming maws of mass driver launchers, carried 2 at a time between wings which spat luminous death. The impacts of their solid and explosive munitions were enough to send ripples and rolling distortions through the metal and glass of the building's surface.
Yeah, I did say that, the clone troops should do this with their air support. So yeah, it's happening. It's just, hearing AFanWithTooMuchTime describing what's happening, it's just, it's really painful, to hear how these people are dying. Ugh. Oh well, this is war. War is terrible. War is bloody.
Shattering and shaking loose tens of men in but a few milliseconds. Lazarus looked up and out, away from the clones above him who were shooting down and out towards the yawning void. There, swooping and hovering like the vicious storm snipes of cursed Carcosa, were the murmuring, hovering forms of the Republic's clone gunships, now redeployed on the orders of a vengeful commander. Ah, feck! Lazarus groaned, unhooking his anchor and swinging down and away from the emplacement a mere second before it was pounded into slag by a rain of medium blaster cannon fire. The Major fell and spun out of control, yelling in fear and working hard not to pass out again, to keep himself just level enough to retain some measure of his senses. He activated the winding release on his belt-mounted rappel spool, undermining the force of his swing by releasing more and more of the length and losing altitude all the while. The fighting retreat of the Calambian forces dissolved into an unabashed rout, thousands of men running, or rather rappelling as quickly as they dared down the side of the building, death chasing and catching them in droves as they went. They'd never make it. It was over, the Major knew. Almost over, he corrected himself. Lazarus reached into his belt and pulled free his last grenade, the grenade. When he had been made a Major, he had been given access to just a few select pieces of war gear that had been available to his predecessor. From among all of those things, he had chosen one particular weapon among them to make sure he kept a grenade. A vortex grenade.
Vortex grenade? Huh. Okay. Is it like a black hole grenade? Vortex grenade. I think I need to look that up. Alright.
Looked at the grinning, skull-like weapon he gripped in his hands, grasping the pin and trigger before thinking better of it. He scanned around instead, eyes moving in a frenzy before spotting a soldier descending relatively nearby, a grenade launcher strapped to his back. The Major clenched his aching teeth and began to swing, moving back and forth until he caught the man's shoulder, making him cry out and struggle. "Hold on! Hey! Listen to me! Fucking listen!" The Major said to the flailing soldier, punching him across the face to punctuate the point. The young Calambian grunted, covering his face and ceasing most of his struggling as he cradled his broken nose and looked at the Major. "Sir!" he muttered past his fingers and dripping, bloody nose. "Your grenade launcher! I need it!" he yelled over the sounds of men screaming and the high-pitched whine of laser weapons sawing through metal. "Now!" 65 watched from his position on the lip as the slim resistance of the retreating Imperials was butchered. His gunship support arriving as promised and targeting the Imperial hardpoints before then taking their time to scrape the fleeing cultists off the platform with persistent laser and blaster fire. Added to the clones like him, who were shooting down into the retreating imps from above, it left little chance that any of them would survive the commander's retaliatory assault. Then, something odd happened. Something 65 had no way to anticipate and no understanding of. It began subtly, or at least relatively subtly. All the colors in the air changed, shifted somewhat. At first, he thought it was something wrong with his HUD, but soon he realized it was far more than just that. And he was not the only one being affected. This effect swiftly deepened, becoming so shocking that the fighting faltered all around them. The colors on everything seemed to invert, white clones becoming black, blackened clones becoming white, and more.
Is this the vortex grenade? Wow, okay.
The effect lasted only 8 or so seconds and was accompanied by a bizarre sound, a sound 65 could not hear with his ears, but rather with his mind. It was like a deep-throated whispering, so low it was barely there, yet undeniably present. Then, just like that, the effect ended, and everything seemed to return to normality. For approximately 2 standard seconds. The next sound was a real, normal sound, and he heard it as a loud pop, similar to the sound of a corked bottle being opened. It was such an innocent, innocuous sound when compared to what it was heralding. 65's eyes grew wide and ached in his skull, red tears rimming his vision as he looked straight into the following interspatial detonation.
Red tears. Oh, okay. This vortex grenade causes side effects. Not just you looking at things with different colors or, hearing interesting sounds, but it also makes you cry out red tears. It must be like blood, right? Wow, okay.
He saw it, but he could not understand it. In a report, he would have described it as a black hole, but one which was not shaped like a circle. If pressed, he'd describe it with great distress as a gash of colorless thirst or unlight. He would attempt to explain its shape as both ultra-Euclidean in nature, while undeniably drafted over a bent and twisted surface of nothing. He'd babble about its size, both large enough to touch so many of the gunships, yet too short to reach the men and clones on the building. Within a theoretical interrogation, thoughtless to the integrity of his mind, the clone would scream about the things he saw inside. The things which looked at him without any eyes, or rather, looked at him with his own eyes, laughed at him with his own voice. But
okay, are there like demons inside this vortex grenade? Is that what's happening here?
At the time, as he witnessed it, all he could do was scream. The clones had no idea not to look into the vortex as it was spawned. The explosion, if one could call it that, was not bright, and it cast no shadows. In spite of that, few Imperials made the same mistake, ducking their heads down and hiding their eyes as the unimaginable weaponized rent in time and space swelled in the air behind them. The tears in the air spilled and split away from their origin, the eldritch technology that forced the phenomenon to occur acting in the semblance of a shaped charge, sparing most of those on the building while hungrily seeking those thinking minds within the gunships. Twisting arms of void-like force warped the air and spiraled out, lancing through all but the farthest and most dispersed of the gunships, causing a horrific myriad of effects. Some ships exploded, combusting into balls of pinkish fire. Others seemed to shrink and fall away, as if having been tossed down a long, inescapable tunnel. And others still merely vanished, the details of their unraveling rendered indescribable by the very nature of their unmaking.
Man, this vortex grenade is something else. Why don't they have more of these things? Wow.
65 struggled to make chronological sense of the explosion. For while it seemed to last for hours, the rain only seemed to resume falling after its damage had been done. And the sweltering wound in reality sealed itself. The commander lay, blinking blood out of his eyes as he tried to recover from what had just happened. No more fire was exchanged. He could hear and see that through his red-tinged vision. For a couple of heart-stopping seconds, 65 feared all his air support had been destroyed by the weapon, whatever it was. Soon, rage replaced fear as his command HUD began to update his details, revealing that most of his gunships were still in one piece, but all of those were clearly fleeing the airspace. "Wing Commander, come in! Turn around! Return to the field!" 65 ordered in a hoarse voice, but he received no reply.
I'm sure those pilots must have seen things from that vortex grenade and it shook them to the core and they're not prepared to go back into battle after that. Yeah. Man, this vortex grenade is really effective. Huh.
He shouted the order with increasing ferocity, but was either cut off or ignored, and the air support that all but guaranteed his revenge did not return. He clenched his teeth, felt the warmth of his crimson tears reach his lips, tasted the metallic tang of his own blood.
Okay, Commander, so what's plan B? What is plan B?
It was pooling in his helmet, and so he rose to his feet and released the seals. With a hateful gesture, he tossed it aside, cracking the visor with the force of his throw. He looked down again, past his feet, past the ledge of the park, and saw that while no one was shooting any longer, the Imperials were still effecting their retreat, still slipping through 65's clenched fingers. He spat blood and spun to the officer at his right, a clone who had been formerly crouching at his side, now standing and at attention. "Get jetpacks equipped on everyone!" he ordered. "Sir?" the clone said hesitantly. "You heard me! Mount up! Immediately! We are not letting a single imp get off this wall! On the double trooper now!" 65 spat, anger yanking each word past wet lips. "Sir, we don't have enough jetpacks. We can supply maybe a tenth of our force. The rest will..." the officer began to report. "We'll use ascension cables. Hand them out. One for each trooper without a pack," the commander finished for him. "Yes, sir. But, sir, your face," the clone added. "What about my face?" 65 snapped. The man pointed a slightly quivering finger. "You're bleeding, sir. A lot. Your eyes are..." the officer began. "My eyes are fine. Get about your orders, trooper," he snapped back. The clone saluted in response. "Yes, sir," he said before doing as ordered. In the meantime, 65 selected the men who would join him with jetpacks, picking them out by name and number. Each responded to his bleeding eyes and face in some way, but he shoved all such concerns ruthlessly aside.
But isn't it raining? Why doesn't he just, just wipe off the blood and he'll be okay? But anyways, maybe it just, creates that dramatic effect that he will need, to galvanize his soldiers. They say, we're not going to let them escape. You see what they did to my face? We cannot allow them to escape.
He could see fine, and he was not growing any weaker, despite the persistent streams of red which fell from his face and began to dye his armor. Soon enough, they were ready. The other men lined up in staggered formations. Ascension cables rigged to belts and secured behind them. "Bring up the wounded after we are deployed," he ordered to the officer. "Arm them and lay them down by the edge of the park. They can help us as best they can from there." 65 finished, sheathing a damaged vibroblade into his belt, now checking his jetpack controls, subtle twitches riddling his movements. The officer said nothing at first, simply watching as 65 tested his pack, sparking the flames beneath it. "Sir," he said a moment later. 65 felt rage spike through his every nerve and fiber. He needed obedience right now, not conscience. "What?" the commander yelled, spinning to fully face the officer. The clone seemed undaunted behind the visor of his white helmet, merely pointing over his shoulder at several massive looming forms. "The ATTEs are here, sir," he reported in a monotone. In spite of the man's lack of enthusiasm, 65 felt his rage melt into perverse joy. Now, yes, now his revenge could truly begin. For his pod, for the clones, for the Republic.
Okay, Plan B is coming into effect. And I like the music. AFanWithTooMuchTime. Yes, I know this this music. I just can't remember which YouTube channel was I watching where I heard this soundtrack from. But yeah, I like it. I think it was Pandora Journey, something like that. Pandora Journey, I can't remember. Yeah, I like the music. Okay.
Lazarus clung to the building, having deployed his anchor and wrapped his arms and legs around an access ladder he had been near enough to reach. He held on for all he was worth, clutching so hard his fresh augmetics sparked and bled pain into his mind. But that pain was not greater than the fear he had felt after launching the weapon, and the terror within him handedly overcame any surgical agony he may have felt. There was no wind. In fact, the rain ceased falling, and that turbulence which did exist was stilled. He closed his eyes tightly, the weird light coming from the vortex bomb still finding his sight in defiance of his actions. And though a deep nausea permeated him as the effects carried themselves out, he was thankful that this seemed to be the extent of his symptoms. He waited until the unlight had faded, and then looked around. "Guardsmen, continue the retreat," he said softly into his vox bead, taking his own orders and disengaging the anchor, beginning his descent at once. The Major was glad to see that the man he had taken the grenade launcher from had survived as well, bewildered by what had just happened, but moving nonetheless. They went down together, reaching the ends of their cables near each other, both trading over to their anchors to reset their main lines once more. It was a few seconds after they had resumed their movement that Lazarus received a crackling, incomplete communique through his vox bead. "Major, this is Captain Jones on the up-facing left flank. Be advised, we've got big toy soldiers in Nothing else made it through, but Lazarus spread the warning anyway, prepping the men for a renewed assault, and none too soon. The Republic replique came running over the side of the platform, cables adhered to their belts and unspooling. They swung down right away and landed on their feet, barrels pointed down as they began a speedy advance. Lazarus and his men opened fire immediately, but quickly found themselves horrifically outnumbered by the mass of the now pursuing enemy. The clones were frenzied and without fear, charging down the side with absolutely no thought for cover or formation outside of what would allow the greatest number of them to fire into the Major's forces as they ran. Lazarus was truly shocked by the desperation of their pursuit, and this only grew the more he observed their assault. The large rifles and automatic gear of the replique forces meant that they were forced to charge at a pace determined by whatever their ascension gear had been set to beforehand. A theory that was backed up by the hanging corpses of the struck and killed clone soldiers near the front, who, in spite of their souls leaving their mortal coils, were still descending in neat formation with their maddened brothers beside them. At that forced pace, they would overcome his men unless their cables came up short, something he prayed would occur every second as the battle line swelled and swelled. Trails of fire and smoke streaked through the gray, raining sky above them, and he squinted, heart racing as he spotted what at first seemed to be missiles. Soon, however, they came close enough to be recognizable as infantry mounted on flight packs. They flew down over the heads of their brother clones and began to open fire, strafing the side of the building with scathing sprays of blue blaster bolts. The trajectory of one veered in his direction, and he found himself forced to kick off and away from the wall in a sudden rush of movement, narrowly avoiding the trail of burning death that struck through his former position. He swung out of control for a moment before the man near him caught him and helped him steady himself.
God Emperor, we need your divine intervention in this battle one more time. One more time. The Penitent Engine was not enough. One more time. Show yourself.
Lazarus thanked the Calambian, brandishing a last pistol and firing up as the younger soldier beside him drew out a compact autogun, unfolded it, loaded it, and began to open chittering sprays of fire on the enemy above them. The vertical battlefield was suddenly filled with soldiers and skirmishes, the massive clone army descending at rapid pace towards the Imperials below them, their liquid cable dispensers feeding their oncoming assault, as rigid boots stepped through glass windows, walking across the shutters beneath. The flashes of las, gun, and blaster fire were joined by the crackling flashes of natural lightning, flaring bright and fierce above them and around them, reminding the Major of the insane altitude this battle was taking place at.
I mean, imagine you're in a fighter jet or something and you're seeing this battle on the building. In the distance, you just see people, scaling on the building, and you see these cables, you see people shooting at each other, back and forth, but in a vertical kind of, positioning. Yeah, it must be really interesting, just to see something like that happen.
He was barely aiming at anything anymore, his mind overcome by the amount of crisis happening around him. Breathing heavily, pain a constant companion, Lazarus found all he could do now was descend and fire up at the approaching army of Republic war clones, hoping and praying that he would somehow reach the desired floor in one piece. He was in this state when something came rocketing around, down from above and right into him like a maligned comet trailing smoke and fire. The Major grunted, all the air driven out of him as two of his ribs cracked under the sudden tackle. Dazed and disoriented, swinging while the new attacker clung to him, Lazarus had already been punched twice before he gathered enough of his wits to shield himself with his arms. A clone equipped with a jetpack had fallen upon him and was in the process of beating him bloody with his bare hands. Lazarus struggled, but his metal limbs, strong as they were also new, slow, and painful to use, and it was all he could do to ward the replique off. The clone in question had no helmet and was bleeding profusely from his eyes. On top of that, those same eyes were wrong.
Commander 65? Wow. What are the chances that you'd be beating up on the commanding officer of these Imperium of Man troops? Major Lazarus, your luck. Your luck is running out. Emperor, like I said before, please, if there's a way for you to save these guys, do something now. Hey.
Irises a deep yellow and red like fire. His glare burned with raw hatred, and he punched into Lazarus's broken ribs, kneed him in the stomach, and snapped an elbow across the Major's face. The Calambian guardsman could do little more than gasp, clutching his pistol and trying to fire into the trooper, but without success. But he was not alone. The other soldier behind them had noticed his major's predicament and cried out a warning before opening up with a spray of bullets which he was quickly forced to veer away. The clone spun, hanging on to Lazarus and choking him with a heavy forearm as he positioned the struggling major between himself and the man who was trying to shoot him. The Calambian floundered, but the clone did not, drawing a blaster pistol with his free hand and firing 8 shots into the Imperial. "Throne, damn it, no!" Lazarus bellowed, trying to jerk around with all the power he had left, firing sprays of last fire from his own pistol as he did. The bloody clone hissed as a beam struck his leg, blackening the armor there, and elbowed Lazarus in the side of the head. The Major staggered, sucking in a breath to recover, but it was too late. With a roar, the clone knocked the gun out of his hand and punched him across the jaw, knocking him limp for a couple of seconds. The replicate drew a knife as he pinned Lazarus tightly to the side of the building, jetpack burning to facilitate it. The Major's face lolled up, and he could see, distantly, the horrific shapes of the Republic's 6-legged gunwalkers, curling and magnetically locking their feet to the side of the platform, beginning their own descent and adding their own firepower to the clone assault. He felt armored fingers grab a fistful of his hair and yank his face forward, forcing the Major to look into the ghastly face of the bleeding clone. "Are you the commander?" the clone asked. Lazarus said and did nothing, and was rewarded with a backhanded strike across the face. "It's over!" the clone yelled through the din of battle and the soft roar of the rain. But as he did, a new kind of light began to fill the air. It was a light that Lazarus had seen before, that tugged a smile at his torn lips, though his barely functioning mind could scarcely explain why. What weapon made that light? He could not remember right there and then. Still, he did find some words to say as the clone before him raised his fist to strike him again. "Almost," the Major said. The clone paused, leaned in, and hissed. "Almost what?" he demanded. As he did, more and more of that new light. That light that was not lightning, not traditional gunfire, or any of the other weapons they had been using. In his mind, the Major recalled the communique he had received just before the battle resumed, and realized he had misplaced its significance. Captain Jones had advised him about incoming big toy soldiers. "Almost over," Lazarus said, just as the clone began to notice the new combatants, their powerful new weapons, and the speeding shapes of their large forms. The clone scowled, and the Major smiled to spite him. "It's over for you, one way or the other!" the bleeding clone declared, reaching forward with his knife and hooking Lazarus' cable with its humming edge. The Major lacked the strength to stop him and could only watch as the cord was cut and he fell away, the world feeling distinctly surreal as he did. Imperial vehicles now stormed the side of the wall, their hatches open and exhaling volley gun fire into the clone flanks, while their dedicated turrets blazed, spitting plasma, chain lass, and bolter fire. And in the center of it all was the hateful face of the clone who had killed him, becoming smaller and smaller as he fell further and further away.
Commander 65. No, man. No. I was just talking about this. That you have to kill them, by either shooting their head off or, use your knife and just stab him in the skull. It's the only way to make sure. This guy can fall straight down to the floor, and the tech priests can still save his life somehow. They'll make him into, half machine, half man. He already has mechanical parts in him already. So yeah, he can probably survive this fall to the ground somehow, some way. That's what I'm saying. By making sure you have to decapitate them or shoot them in the head or stab them in the head with your combat knife, do something like that. Something that is extremely and totally fatal, so that they would never come back from something, from physical trauma like that to the head. Not throwing them off the building thinking that, he's going to die. No, he's not going to die. Oh gosh.
Lazarus closed his eyes then. His brief time in command was now over.
I'll only believe that when, someone says something like, yeah, he's dead. So right now what AFanWithTooMuchTime Time is saying, I'm not believing it. I'm not going to take that until someone actually tells us, okay, Major Lazarus is dead. He's not coming back. He's dead. Yeah.
They came in the darkness, cloaked within the storm, swaddled in the rain and thunder. Powerful weapons, instruments of savagery and death, were held in readied hands, each bearer still, silent, attentive. The Scions did not crack jokes to relieve their tensions, nor did they pray or in any way distract themselves from their task.
Are these Scions like another special force under the Astra Militarum? Yeah. What was her name again? Major Dominus was saying that, the Imperium of Man have got a lot of special forces, battling on this planet, while the Star Wars galaxy only have the clone troops and the Jedi, that are available currently. And yeah, the diversity of the Imperium of Man is revealing itself in this battle. The diversity of their forces, the diversity of their special forces especially.
Instead, the elite Imperial warriors regarded every second individually, watching it carefully as it passed before doing the same with the next. They were prepared to spring into action at any moment, be it as a team alongside the men and women they had drilled with for years, or alone, as the sole survivors of any given crisis. They were prepared. The Tempestor Prime, Aloysius Cinder, had been quick to secure the use of many Taurox Prime trooper transports for his operations at the onset of his deployment, and now his forethought truly shone as brilliance. For through their strategic use, he had liberated himself from the need to rely on their faltering air forces for their deployment options. And that seemed truer now more than ever before, as he saw the unique nature of the battlefield they were entering. His forces had divided, one half to secure the survivors near the bridge, and the other to come here in order to retrieve the Major. Vox communications had been sporadic at best, but their tech priests had managed to recalibrate their auger arrays to pick up on Lazarus's Vox frequency.
I just remembered that I have heard of the Tempestus Scions before. But this was on if the Emperor had a text-to-speech device. Yes. And I have seen how they look like, potentially how they look like in that episode. I think it was episode 26, part 1. Yeah. So now they're here in Star Wars versus Warhammer 40K. All right. I guess this will be, like the first time I hear what they're capable of. Because, if the Emperor had a text-to-speech device, it's mainly like a joke. It's fun. So I couldn't really tell or gauge how powerful they were. Here, hopefully, AFanWithTooMuchTime Time can go deeper into what are they capable of doing, what kind of weapons do they hold, and armaments, and yeah, let's continue.
They could not understand anything he was saying, nor communicate back to him beyond sending static towards his receiver, but they could use the weak signal to track his location. Arriving from below, the Tempestor Prime and his soldiers were pressed against the backs of their chairs or hung from their restraints, as their transport sped up the side of the metal building, using the metal shutters and Durasteel frame to adhere their magnetized treads. Air support had been lost, but the Scions knew other ways to deploy and would not be held at bay by something as trivial as the enemy owning air superiority. And so, the work had fallen on to the honorable fleet of the Taurox Primes, which Aloysius had made sure to secure prior to the enemy even entering the system. He'd fought in hive cities before, and knew how invaluable they could be. And seeing what his auspex now revealed, he knew this would only be proven true several times over. Here, on the side of a building half the width of a small city, the Imperium was engaged in vertical warfare with an absolutely massive number of Republic replicae. They were too many to defeat outright, but all they needed to accomplish was the successful withdrawal of their allied forces, and to do so while stinging the enemy hard enough to prevent further pursuit. And already the commander of these Scions could see how imminently possible this goal was, as the first of his Taurox forces began to engage and disrupt the swarming wall of white soldiers and their vehicle support. Men of the Empire, prepare for battle. Pattern Sigma Prime. Deploy and counter-assault with extreme aggression. Primes Alpha, Beta, and Delta, follow our lead. We will target their walker platforms. Empty transports are to collect the retreating and wounded elements of the Columbian 503rd Assault Regiment. Keep an eye out for Major Lazarus. His safety and retrieval is currently our top priority. The Tempestor Prime was saying before he was unceremoniously interrupted by the tech priest aide who rode to his right.
Major Lazarus's signal is approaching rapidly.
The cyborg droned, spider-like in his alcove, a whole host of tendril-like mechadendrites holding him in place.
How rapidly?
The Tempestor Prime asked.
Current calculations place him at near terminal velocity for this world's gravity. 28 seconds before intercept. On the left side of the vehicle.
The priest informed. The Tempestor began to move without another word or gesture, seizing the ascension cable at his own hip and hooking it to a bar running along the center of the Taurox's roof.
No way. There's no way. There's just no way. He's going to try and, capture Major Lazarus. You should have killed him, Commander 65. But anyways, we continue.
Despite the smoothness of his movements, it all looked undeniably odd when watched from a third view, since the Taurox was not level, but facing straight up as it approached the battle above them. In spite of this, it elicited no remarks from the silent men and women within, who watched their prime through the cold, glassy light of their encompassing Omni-Shield tactical helmets.
Keep to my orders,
he said as he worked open the hatch to the left of the climbing transport and, without so much as a look back, threw himself over the ledge, rappel cables squealing as it unwound after him. He jumped out in advance of their projected intersection, rain blasting his body the instant it exited the cabin of the vehicle. He knew that the Major would be falling at a much faster rate than he himself was, and estimated that he'd need the head start, particularly with his Taurox continuing to ascend as he fell. Arms out, the Prime spun himself around so he was facing up and leveled out his fall. He saw that several bodies were falling all at once, composed of many men from both sides, and the sight made his heart quicken by just a pace. With little more than a twitch of reflex, he focused his Omni-Shield helmet package, squinting and triggering the hardware there to perform several intelligent overlay wipes. First, the rain vanished from his view, followed by the appearance of halos of light surrounding each of the soldiers which were falling above him. Less than a second later, the light around the falling clone soldiers winked out, leaving only the felled Columbians highlighted within the augmented sight. And then, in the last moment, those lights too winked out, one by one in rapid succession, until only one target remained. The falling, limp body of the Major. Acting quickly, Cinder moved his arms, maneuvering in the onrushing air to slide beneath the falling form of Lazarus in the final possible instance before he passed. The Prime wrapped his arms around the unconscious commander and grunted as they pitched and tumbled through the wet air.
The Emperor has saved your life. One more time, Major Lazarus. The Emperor has come through. Wow. There were so many times where you should have died, but here you are. You're still here with us.
Wasting no time in triggering his grab chute, and not a moment too soon. The line went taut, the Taurox now violently pulling the two men up after it. But the harshness of the pull and the lethal change in momentum was reduced to below bone-breaking levels by the mitigating power of the chute, which hummed on his back as the Tempestor Prime clung to the Major's body. A breath or two later, the auto spool had begun reeling him in, drawing them both back towards the battle easily as it pulled up against their greatly reduced gravity and weight. Though it would be a minute or so before the Prime would be physically back inside the Taurox, Cinder had already rejoined the fight in nearly every way imaginable. Holding tight to his charge, he watched the engagements progressing through the powerful monitoring systems of his helmet, able to see and hear through the eyes and ears of his every soldier. From this tyrant's eye, he watched his plans fall into motion and made the slight adjustments they needed to fulfill their purpose. The hatches and doors slid open on countless rushing platforms, engines roaring against the pull of gravity as they clawed their way into and through the enemy ranks. Scions of the 50th Calambian Thunderbirds exited their assault craft on wings of smoke and fire, cutting through the rain on heavy-duty flight packs. Larger, slower, and less maneuverable than the Republic's variants, the Imperium's Vulcrus-patterned flight platforms made their virtues known as soon as the flying replicae attempted to make use of their own advantages. Unlike most of their Calambian brethren, the Thunderbirds did not eschew the use of lass weaponry, a fact they flaunted as they brought their Ryza-patterned hotshot volley guns to bear. Heavy and cumbersome, such weapons could normally not be fired by airbound infantry, with the Republic's own jet troopers favoring carbines over rifles for the distinct reduction in the weapon's weight. But the rigs used by the Imperial Scions had no such issues, and held their troops aloft in steady harmony as they took aim and opened fire. The volley guns rained crimson hell down upon the massed forces of the Republic's warrior caste, doing far more than blackening armor and burning flesh. Clones struck by the beams produced by these Ryzen weapons were turned to ashes almost instantly, most unable to scream as they were incinerated, and those who did were universally unable to complete their last utterances.
Oh, gosh.
Were this the extent of the weapon's power, it would have been enough. It would have staved off the Republic. But no, for the volley guns, as their names suggested, unleashed persistent sprays of such beams, not single columns. Each gun spilled light as though it were cutting a portal straight into hell. Mist and clouds forming about the towering platform as the rain was boiled and vaporized in the unending hails of murder the Imperials were dispensing.
You know, this reminds me of that movie, War of the Worlds, when the aliens, dug their machines out of the ground and, it made that trumpet noise, and then they would activate the weapons, and then, when the weapons fire at human beings, they would just turn into ash, just like that. This weapon reminds me of that. Oh my gosh.
Though caught without cover or blast shields, the clones found their defense in numbers, and quickly began targeting the hovering forms of the Scions, unleashing volleys of their own. But those volleys did not meet with flak plate, the paltry armor which could only resist blaster fire for 1 or 2 shots at best. Instead, the replique of the Republic would find men sheathed head to toe in ceramite. Blue bolts sizzling, denting, and bouncing off and away from their armor as the Imperials continued to dispense death.
Man, when you thought that the Astartes were the only ones with ceramite armor, or maybe even the Sisters of Battle, here they are, the Tempestus Scions, they're also having ceramite armor. Yikes.
More success was had when the crawling forms of the ATTE walkers oriented their blaster cannons on the Scions. Massive green bolts slamming into the flying soldiers and sending them spinning away, smoking and already dead within their cracked plates. Yet, even this proved a temporary reprieve from punishment, for no sooner had the crawling tanks begun to stall the tide of Imperial specialists than the Tempestor Prime's orders came to fruition. The Taurox Primes arrived in small herds of raiding vehicles, closing in around the lumbering, slow-moving walkers. Clone soldiers, unable to move or adjust themselves adequately in their current positions, screamed and died, run down and over by the Imperial vehicles as battle cannons, twin-linked hot-shot volley guns, and pintle-mounted storm bolters all opened fire without mercy or rest into the faces of the insectoid tanks. The transparent steel cockpit covers and gunner turrets were poor defense for the men inside as they were laid into with precision fire. The Scions within the Tauroxes neatly decapitating the Republic walkers one by one until none remained. Their smoking, pockmarked forms falling dead off the side of the platform and into the yawning abyss beneath.
Oh, okay. Plan B is not working out. What is Plan C? Commander 65. What is Plan C?
The clones did not rout, however, and soon seemed to begin organizing themselves into focused fire teams, finding limited success in piling blaster bolts onto single targets. But by the time these tactics were implemented in any large way, the replica had reached the ends of their lines. Furthermore, while they had been fighting off the Scions, the majority of the empty Taurox support platforms had spent their time collecting the fleeing Calambian guardsmen from the building wall, and ferrying them down to the exit floor, returning only to make repeat trips or to collect their Scions. Though the battle had been long, it was very nearly finished by the time Aloysius Cinder hauled the unconscious Calambian Major into his vehicle, and handed him off to the medic in his command squad. They came with the storm, and as the storm broke, all the Republic had left of the sudden assailants was the blood-tinged mist which permeated one side of the park platform, and the losses they had taken at the hands of the Imperials. Coming back to the top of the platform, the remaining men would soon discover that the cornered survivors at the bridge had also vanished, slipping through their clenched fists and leaving the Republic forces with only trenches and the dead men within them. In the end, all the clones could take away was a lesson, and a painful one at that. And it was certainly one which bloody eyes would not soon forget.
Guys, yes, that's it with Star Wars versus Warhammer 40K, episode 22, A Storm Breaks. Live to fight another day, Major Lazarus. Live to fight another day. Yeah, guys, this episode was... It was a slugfest between these two factions here. You know, from the very beginning with the Imperium of Man forces trying to retreat, you know, they needed a distraction. The Penitent Engine came in there and became that distraction. A very disturbing, very, you know, hideous, monstrous distraction for the clone troops to deal with. They thought they defeated the machine, you know, the first time, you know, after they shot up the legs and half of the body. But no, you know, the only way to actually effectively kill, you know, these machines is by making sure that the pilot's head is gone. And that's what Commander 65 has done. You know, he had to make sure that the pilot would never be able to control this machine ever again. You know, blew up the head, kept on shooting at the body, making sure that this body is destroyed and this machine would never move again. And from that battle, we were going over the ledge with the Columbian troopers along with Major Lazarus. Many of them got shot up, you know, as the AT tanks were coming in with their artillery fire. And of course, you have the clone troops who are also coming in with their fire. A lot of troops didn't make it to the ledge, you know, to scale down the building. And even as they were doing that, they were still being chased after by the clone troops. It was crazy, really. This battle was crazy. Commander 65 was relentless. He wanted his revenge, no matter the cost, no matter what happens. He even brought in air support. They did their work. However, Major Lazarus had another, you know, trick or another card up his sleeve, and he used it, his trump card. And yeah, that what was it called again? Vortex grenade was something else. I think I need to, you know, check up information on this vortex grenade and see what it can do and its effects on other human beings or other organic beings, I should say. Because yeah, what it was doing to those clone trooper transport vessels, that was very interesting, really. And the area of effect of the vortex grenade, you know, how it affects other human beings, you know, making them cry out blood, making them see things, you know, in terms of different kind of colors and what they're able to hear as well. It's a very exotic form of weaponry, you know, something that I would attribute to the Elder, you know, having, you know, these vortex grenades, or maybe even the not the Tau. It's just too exotic even for them. The Necrontyr, yes, the Necrontyr might also have something similar to that. So yeah, that was very, very interesting. And then of course we had the Tempestus Scions coming in, saving the day, saving the Columbian troops before they were completely wiped out as well, you know. So you could actually say the God Emperor was there. He was with Major Lazarus and his men and women every step of the way, you know, from beginning with the Penitent Engine all the way to the Tempestus Scions. You know, they were all there to give these guys a bit of luck, a bit of a break, and, you know, to save them from complete destruction at the hands of the clone troops. And, you know, the clone troops tried their best. They tried their best. Yes, I did not like the fact that they were rushing off to battle against, you know, the Imperium of Man forces. You know, they had them cornered. There was only one way for the Imperium of Man forces to go, and that was to go scaling down that building. They had them cornered in that spot right there. They could have just taken their shots, you know, carefully with accuracy at anyone that's trying to scale the building. They could have done that, wait for the air support to come in, and then of course make a strafing run on the troops that are going scaling down the building. You know, they could have just taken their time with everything, but you know, Commander 65 wanted this to be done as soon as possible. And you know, you can be prepared. You can be prepared for any eventuality, but sometimes things just don't happen the way you want them to happen. You know, I mean, in war, nothing is assured. Victory is never assured. No matter how much you prepare for it, no matter how much resources, manpower you have on the field, you know, your enemy can surprise you, and that's what Major Lazarus has done here. He has surprised us all. He has surprised me, you know, using these exotic weapons like the Vortex grenade, you know, having the Scions coming in as well. That was a bit of a surprise as well. And of course, in the beginning with the Penitent Engine, you know, things just happen and it's out of your control. All you can do is try your best to salvage the situation. And Commander 65 tried. You know, he had plan A, he had plan B, and then of course he had plan C as well, but it's just not enough. It was just not enough. Yeah, the Colombian troops live to fight another day. Major Lazarus will live to fight another day. And yeah, this episode was good. Episode 22. Okay, guys, that's it. If you want to check out the original video as well as AFanWithTooMuchTime's YouTube channel, the links are in the description below. If you like my reaction, please give me a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos, and I will see you guys next week. Okay? Good night. Oh yes, there's another video. Let me just check what's the name of the video. Yes, Star Wars vs. Warhammer episode 22 after talk video flub. Yeah, I'm not sure what does flub mean, but that's what I'm reacting to next. You'll probably see the card somewhere up here. Yeah, just click on it and then we can continue reacting to AFanWithTooMuchTime. Alright, bye bye.